Welcome, friends, to Jim Cantelon Today. I'm Jim Cantelon. We've been coming your way now for about 4 years with this very simple format, just basically going through the Gospels. That's what I do. Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts. Acts is sort of part 2 of Luke, and John. And when I finally get to the end of John, I'll turn around and start all over again. I really think this is a valuable thing to do. It's all about Jesus, and the whole world wants to know more about him, including you, right? And me. We'll be back with Luke right after this.
In Africa, even the most basic medical aid is often non-existent. It is a continent that has been ravaged by disease. Malaria, tuberculosis, HIV, and AIDS are unrelenting. Every man, woman, and child suffers from a lack of adequate health care. Even treatable illnesses like diarrhea and upper respiratory infections can prove deadly. Clinics are too few and often beyond the reach of those in rural areas. WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, is equipping mobile medical clinics with knowledge and tools to reach out to the sick. Trained nurses are treating the ill. Communities are being educated on hygiene and disease prevention. Voluntary counseling and testing for HIV and AIDS is also offered through the clinic. Fear of stigma and discrimination keeps many from being tested for HIV. Nurses address this issue. They work to provide emotional and medical support for those who test positive for the virus. Communities are being transformed through education and medical treatment brought by mobile clinics. Knowledge about disease transmission is changing behaviors and preventing many illnesses. Basic health care prevents needless deaths. Voluntary counseling and testing has also curbed the spread of AIDS.
Many people have learned a lot about HIV/AIDS. Since we are taught, we are trained as community health workers, we have the knowledge, we give it to them, even through role plays and everything, even by talking to them as we go in the villages. So now people are aware what HIV/AIDS is, how it can be prevented, how it can be infected, and all that.
By supporting WOW's Working for Orphans and Widows mobile medical clinics, you can bring hope to countless communities. You can save a life.
So friends, we are in Luke chapter 13, and don't be alarmed, you're going to hear some weird sounds sort of in the background. There's a big construction project going on all around the studio, and rather than wait and hope that they'll stop, we're just going to soldier on here. And if that's okay with you, that's okay with me. Luke 13, let's pick it up in verse 31. On that very day, some Pharisees came saying to him, "Get out and depart from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go, tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I shall be perfected. Nevertheless, I must journey today, tomorrow, and the day following, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish outside of Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets, stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left you desolate, and assuredly I say to you, you shall not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Now, we shouldn't be surprised that some Pharisees were looking out for Jesus. Not everybody was against Jesus from the Pharisaical perspective. For example, Nicodemus was a Pharisee. Joseph of Arimathea, who took Jesus' body down from the cross and buried him in his own tomb, was a Pharisee. The Apostle Paul was a Pharisee. The Pharisees were a party of religious leaders who were very prominent. I think the word is prushim. I think that's an Aramaic word from which Pharisee is derived. And it just basically means separated ones and or interpreters. I should say they were interpreters of the Mosaic Law, and as such played a critical role. They were very temple-centric, if you will. They were concerned about raising their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. They were good guys. It wasn't a case of them, being clowns. However, as you go through the Gospels, you see again and again that the Pharisees were the ones who put up, initially at least, the most resistance against Jesus. I say initially because later in the story of Jesus, during the what's known as the Passion, surrounding the events of his arrest and his crucifixion and his burial, the Sadducees and the elite temple, you'd call them the elite temple leaders, were very much involved as well. So the Pharisees were the major sort of critical mass of opposition. However, these guys here were warning Jesus, warning him about Herod, who wanted to kill him. And, they told Jesus to flee because, Herod had killed John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. So why wouldn't he take aim at Jesus as well? And Jesus responds very abruptly, almost aggressively, when he says, "Look, that guy's a fox. Go and tell that fox." In other words, tell that rascal. I cast out demons, perform cures today and tomorrow. Third day I shall be perfected. Perfected meaning my work will be accomplished. I'm just going to keep on keeping on, regardless of Herod. So he gave this bold answer, and he makes it very clear that he doesn't fear demons. He's not intimidated by diseases. And so Herod is basically a minor threat. Jesus had more important work to do in Jerusalem. That's basically what he's saying. And that important work was essentially the watershed of salvation history. He was to die for the sins of all of us in Jerusalem. And the thought of his impending death in that holy city brought out this lament, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem." Not a lot has changed over 2,000 years. Jerusalem has always been at the epicenter of the world's conflicts. The Crusades, as you know from your study of history, were all centered on Jerusalem. Jerusalem has changed hands so many times. And even though, the land of Israel is a very small land, very minor really compared to the huge land masses around it, it nevertheless was on a critical trade route for centuries and always played a key role in the overall economies of Europe, Asia, and Africa. So it was kind of a central location, and there was always conflict about Jerusalem. And so when Jesus laments, that lament could be lamented today. Jerusalem is still, in turmoil. I lived there for 7 years. I raised our 3 kids there. My wife and I were very involved in planting what's now known as King of Kings Church in Jerusalem. So, we lived there. Our kids went to local Israeli schools. They speak Hebrew as fluently as they speak English today. My wife's very good in Hebrew. I'm not so good. I'm the slow coach in the family. But the point is, it was our home for 7 years. And even to this day, my adult kids are all in the ministry, and they all have children of their own, but they still refer to Jerusalem as their hometown. And I understand that because I feel very bonded with it too. So when Jesus is lamenting over Jerusalem here, I can relate to it to a very large extent. In fact, I spent more time living in Jerusalem than he did, even though he was there at very critical moments in his ministry. But he says, "You who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you." The point being that the Lord was very merciful to Israel, so stiff-necked, so disobedient, so rebellious throughout most of her history. And the Lord kept, turning the other way, coming back when they would be weeping out because of their duress and their anguish over some new foreign occupation. God has a great love for Jerusalem. In fact, he says in the scripture, he's placed his name there. In other words, my honor, my reputation is there. What happens in Jerusalem, concerns me because the whole world looks at Jerusalem and sees me as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if Jerusalem is suffering, the world's view of me is suffering. You see that in Ezekiel chapter 36, 37. So Jesus is really lamenting because this is the signature city, if you will, for his Father in heaven. And he said, I've wanted to draw you together. I've wanted to protect you like a hen protects her little chicks. Have you ever had that experience? You walk into a farmer's yard where there is a mother hen with a bunch of chicks, and as you approach, she clucks at them and they all scatter, or I should say all come to her. She puts out her wings, they gather under her wings, and she protects them from you. That's the imagery that Jesus is using here. And he says, look, your house has left you desolate. And he's speaking prophetically there. It wasn't desolate yet, but it would soon be desolate. And it wasn't very far from Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension to 70 AD, when the Roman ruler Titus came in and besieged the city. It took about 3 years to really complete the job. But the horrors of that conflict, and what's interesting about that, friends, is that it wasn't just the case of the Romans, fighting the Jews. It was the Jews fighting the Jews. There were 2 or 3 different zealot groups who were hard at each other within the city walls, who actually fought one another in the temple. There were bodies and blood all over the city, Jew on Jew. It wasn't just a case of Rome versus Israel. It was Israelites versus themselves. And you need to read the historian Josephus to fully appreciate what was really going on there. But nevertheless, the city fell eventually, and people fled. That was, if you will, the end of that current history at that time of Jerusalem. And it has come back, but it's never really come back in the sense that the temple was destroyed, and the temple, which is at the epicenter of Israel's faith, and Jerusalem, the city proper, is no more. So when Jesus weeps over Jerusalem and he says, your house has left you desolate, he's not kidding around. He's speaking prophetically, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. So that's enough said there. We're going to follow him into a Pharisee's house right after this break.
Assure you, from the inside, it is happening. God is our hope. God is all we believe in, this God. And he has called us to be the repairers of walls and to take care of the widow and the orphan in their time of need. And that is exactly what we do. Lives are changing. Why? Because Jesus is Lord. And why? Because Christians have come together as a body. The united body of Christ is coming and saying, it stops with this generation. We break it and we move on.
The kind of religion that God endorses is to care for orphans and widows in their distress, justice, and to keep oneself unpolluted from the world, righteousness.
So friends, we're now in chapter 14 of Luke. We're not speedy, but we are making progress. And once again, just to let you know, some of that thumping and weird sounds going on behind me is just simply construction around the studio. And there's nothing that we can do about it other than soldier on. So I apologize, but I'll talk through it and hopefully you can listen through it. Okay, Luke chapter 14. Now it happened, as he went into the house of one of the rulers of the Pharisees to eat bread on the Sabbath, they watched him closely. And behold, there was a certain man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus answering spoke to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? But they kept silent. And he took him and healed him and let him go. Then he answered them, saying, Which of you, having a donkey or an ox that has fallen into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they couldn't answer him regarding these things. Now let's just stop there for a minute. Jesus is reclining at dinner as a guest of a prominent Pharisee. And when I say reclining, I mean reclining. I think I've mentioned this before. I'll mention it again. In Jesus' time, you didn't sit on a chair at a table with a tablecloth and all that. You know, the picture of the Last Supper, the famous Da Vinci picture, is not an accurate reflection of the times at all. You had a low table that was maybe 6 inches off the ground. It was laden with food, various little dishes, just like you'll get these days in genuine Middle Eastern restaurants. And there were pillows. You would come in and you would recline on your left side with a pillow, okay? Kind of drape your arm over the pillow and kind of lean on it with your feet out that way. And while you're doing that, slaves come along and they wash your feet and make sure you're comfortable, and you're talking to your friends at the table because everyone's reclining in the same way. So your head and your pillow is next to the feet of the next person, or the knees, whatever, depending on the angle. And that was the way you would recline at table. And then with your right hand, you would, reach into these various plates, and they'd be passed around. And a big part of it was pita bread, as we call it now. You break off some of this flat bread and you dip it in things and eat it with your hands. There were no knives and forks. It was just a very, the closest I've come to eating like this have been the times that I've been in Ethiopia and also in India, where they eat with their hands. And for a lot of us here in the West, we think, oh, gee, I don't want to do that. Well, millions, hundreds of millions of people to this day eat with their hands. That's just the way it was, okay? So he's reclining at the table, and it's a prominent Pharisee. We don't know why he'd invited Jesus, but Jesus accepted the invitation. And there's a fascinating mix of healing and or discussion going on at the same time. The healing had to do with a man suffering from what several versions of Scripture call dropsy. And I did a little research on this. Dropsy essentially is edema, which is swelling due to water retention. And I guess this guy had a pretty bad case of it. And he must have been a man of influence. Otherwise, why would he have been invited to this by invitation only event at this prominent Pharisee's home with this radical Galilean rabbi named Jesus as the guest? But he was there with dropsy. He may have had a hard time getting in there. He may have had a hard time getting down to the level of reclining at that low table. We don't know. But Jesus healed him, just like that. There's not much conversation going on between him and the man. Jesus just heals him. And the fact that it was a Sabbath day didn't seem to concern Jesus. Now, what a lot of us people here in the West do not understand, a lot of Gentiles don't understand, is how sacred the Sabbath day is to, at least these days, the Orthodox Judaism. I'm fully aware of it because, having lived in Jerusalem for 7 years, my wife and I and our 3 kids were engaged with Shabbat, as we called it, every Friday night at sundown through to Sunday night, I should say sundown on Saturday night, 24-hour period. It took us a while when we first moved to Jerusalem back in 1981 to adapt and to adjust to everything shutting down about 2, 3 in the afternoon on Fridays. Restaurants, buses, stores, everything closed. Things would just kind of quieten down. I remember my office was right downtown Jerusalem, and I'd be in my office getting ready for a Sunday sermon on Friday, and it was like the whole city would just kind of go, just kind of breathe out and relax. It just became so peaceful suddenly. And I'd look out my window and I would see young families with flowers, a bottle of wine, and some challah bread, special Shabbat bread, walking down the street, going to their parents' place for the Kabbalat Shabbat meal. Kabbalat Shabbat meaning welcoming the Sabbath. It began with the mother of the house lighting the candles and praying a blessing, and then the family would gather around the table, and the oldest, usually the father or the grandfather, would stand up at the end of the table, and he'd take some of the challah and he'd break it and bless it and distribute it. Then he'd take some wine, pour it and bless it, distribute it, and everyone, right down to the 2-year-old kids, would participate in this very special ceremony, welcoming the Sabbath. Interesting, when it comes to the Last Supper, when Jesus did the same with the bread and the wine, I see it as just simply a trigger for memory. As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, Jesus said, once a week, every Friday, they were doing this. Jesus wanted to be remembered. I think that's very human of him and very appropriate. Nevertheless, that's what's going on here. It's Sabbath. Now, on Sabbath, you didn't work. You weren't allowed to walk very far. There are all kinds of rules and regulations about Sabbath. If you want to pick up your own English-speaking copy of the Jewish Talmud, which is most interesting reading, you can read all about it in there. But he heals him, and then he sends him on his way, we see in 4b, probably due to the son man's enthusiasm at his total healing and wanting to get to his family and friends, show his wife. Away he goes. The pushback was immediate, albeit nonverbal, but Jesus perceived this nonverbal pushback from the host and the guests for working, in quotes, on the Sabbath. So he asked them a piercing question about their own Sabbath behavior, and then told 2 parables about distraction, hubris, entitlement, the kingdom of heaven. And the room became very, very silent. Let's pick it up there. Let's see, where will I do it here? Okay. Which of you, when your ox falls into a pit, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? And they couldn't answer him. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noted how they chose the best places, saying to them, when you're invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honorable than you be invited by him. And he who invited you and him come and say to you, give place to this man, and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. When you're invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, friend, go up higher. Then you'll have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And then he said to him who invited him, why do you give dinner or a supper? Do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich people, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. When you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Now, just simple lessons here from Jesus, speaking to the Pharisees, and probably his disciples were in the environment as well. You're going to miss out on the Feast of the Kingdom because of your busyness, he's saying to them. The poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, whom you see as sinners, they'll be there and you won't be there. You'll miss out. Spiritual pride is what will keep you from that banquet. Your sense of national entitlement will nullify your entry to the kingdom. Whereas the Gentiles, who live outside the city, on the street, and in the laneways, will take your place. Pretty harsh words from Jesus, but he's making a point with the Pharisees. We're not looking here at self-aggrandizement. We're not looking here at works of righteousness that we have done. It's only by God's mercy that anyone enters the kingdom. And that applies to the most Orthodox Jew and to the most despised Gentile. Everyone counts.
Karinene, Samiro Muyeanika inyumba
A
yangu.
house.
Maybe they're scared of this. Maybe give a shot. Sana. Not if I'm looking. Karibu sana.
I'm okay.
Seka.
So friends, if you want more than I can give you in the time limitations of television and the internet, you can order this book, Cantelon's Casual Commentary, a 21st Century Guide to the Life of Jesus. It's something I've spent 3 years writing. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke, Acts, and John. I follow the scripture word by word right through the entire gospel. And it's for you. I wrote it for you. And all you need to do is just type it into your search engine, and all the online retailers are carrying it. You can choose the one you want and order it, and they'll send it to you. It's not free, you have to pay for it, but anything good is worth paying for, right? But I know that you'll enjoy it. We all need to be studying the Bible more, and we certainly need to be studying the life of Jesus more. And so this book is all about Jesus, and I hope that it will bring you great benefit. So thank you for watching, and don't forget, working for orphans and widows. You see the promos? That's what we're about.